What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So at this point, 15 teams have clinched a spot in the Stanley Cup playoffs after my New York Islanders clutched up last night against the New Jersey Devils. So I thought it'd be a fun idea for Tier List Tuesday. We do a tier list every single Tuesday on this channel. If you're new around here, that I would look at the non-playoff teams and tier list them. So in looking at it, this is going to be our tiers. Playoffs likely next year. This is, I'd go so far to say like over 60% chance I'd say that they make the playoffs next year. Maybe next year, legit like 30 to 60% chance that they can make it. They definitely have a shot. That should be their goal next year. 2 to 3 years away, pretty self-explanatory. No man's land means that they kind of have an old-ish core. They don't have a ton of elite prospects. They probably need a rebuild, but they haven't really committed to a rebuild. And then deep rebuild is probably north of 3+ years until they're in the playoffs. I'm going to be including the teams that are battling for the final wildcard spot right now because 3 of them are going to end up not making it. I know some of you guys are probably watching this Tuesday night or Wednesday morning saying that team's in the playoffs. The Washington Capitals are in the playoffs. This is being filmed Tuesday afternoon, so we're going to include them. Up first, Chicago Blackhawks. You might think I'm going to say deep rebuild, but I think at this point they are 2 to 3 years away, considering Connor Bedard in 2 to 3 years for sure is going to be a superstar top 15, top 10 player in the entire NHL. And they got a bunch of prospects in the 2022-2023 draft. Most of their core, besides like the guy that they're going to take this year, is in the system already. I think by next year, they're still probably going to get a top 6 pick, but I'm not sure you'd be that satisfied if they're by far the worst team in the NHL. I expect them to be a mid-60s point team, start to take some winning steps for the Chicago Blackhawks. And with Bedard, you look at it, Connor McDavid made the playoffs in 2017. I don't think that's reasonable next year for the Blackhawks to make the goddamn playoffs, but they should be a competitive team within 3 years from now. The Detroit Red Wings, I'm going to go maybe next year. You could maybe say playoffs are likely if Lucas Raymond takes another step, Seider takes another step, Edvinson's an impact guy next year, but I can't safely say over 60%, especially considering hopefully with a team that I'm going to discuss later, I think it's going to be even more competitive to get in those wild card spots, especially for Detroit, where I don't see them jumping the 3 teams in the Atlantic Division right now that are in spots, as well as even a Tampa Bay with a healthy Sergachev, with the fully healthy Vasilevsky. I think they're probably going to be better than Detroit. So maybe next year, they're definitely going to be in the mix. The Seattle Kraken, I'll go maybe next year as well. I kind of saw this fall off come from them this year. They shot absolutely insane, but they are still a pretty balanced team. And when you look at it, they actually got their franchise goaltender this season when looking at Joey Decord. That was their one weakness in prior seasons. They made the playoffs with Grubauer playing pretty shit. So next year, if they regroup, if they're fully healthy, it's definitely like on the 30% side. It's not closer to the 40, 50, 60, but they can potentially make it next year. They have solid NHL players. They ended up re-signing Jordan Eberle, bringing him back. They're going to try to win next year, and I can maybe see them make the playoffs. I wouldn't be absolutely shocked if they did. Pittsburgh Penguins, you can go maybe next year, but I think I might go no man's land at this point, considering they traded Jake Gensel. Next season, they'll probably be my 10th or 11th best team in the entire Eastern Conference, and they clearly don't have a prospect pool. They're just holding on for Sidney Crosby. So although, yeah, they're going to be better next year than the Chicago Blackhawks, I would have them kind of in this no man's land compared to next year. They could make the playoffs, but I'm not sure I really see it happening, so they're kind of in no man's land. Buffalo Sabres are definitely in maybe next year. Took a step back this year, but when looking at UPL really emerging, that was their number one concern with me was goaltending. I didn't think that we could trust Devin Levi, who was 21, 22 years old, but UPL's been great. If they can regroup, get a far better coach, fired their coach this morning, if they can get better coaching, just better overall system and not choke away at the end in third periods, I think the Buffalo Sabres can return to that team that they were last year and take another step when looking at guys like Peterka, Benson, Savoy's probably going to be on the team. Coolidge might be on the team next year. They definitely should be in the mix and maybe potentially make it. St. Louis, I think they're kind of in no man's land as well, although they have a much younger core than a Pittsburgh Penguins. Looking at Kyrou, looking at Thomas, they have a good future, but they still don't have any top tier prospects. I like Snuggerud, I like Dvorsky, but they probably should trend more towards a rebuild and get more of a better sense of direction. I would trade Pavel Buchnevich this offseason and just heavily more so enter that deep retool. I'm not sure if they're going to. So right now, I think I am going to go in no man's land. I don't think that they're going to make the playoffs next year. I don't think Jordan Binnington's going to have like a Vezina top 5 level season again. So I'm kind of low on the St. Louis Blues. Arizona Coyotes is weird because this year they're going to finish 70-ish points, but I'm actually going to go with maybe next year. When looking at them, they have $40 million of cap space. I think it's like 48 million if they move Voracek over to LTIR. So if Ryan Smith in his first season with the Coyotes, with the Yetis, whatever the hell they're called, if he wants to be a highly competitive team, I think it's definitely possible. They were 19-4 at one point in this season, and obviously then lost like 14 goddamn straight games. But I think they can be a highly competitive team. I'm pretty high in the Coyotes as long as nobody wants out, nobody refuses to sign a goddamn contract extension. I think they're going to be in the mix and can potentially make it. New Jersey Devils, I think that they're likely to make the playoffs next year. As long as they get solid goaltending, I think they are a playoff team. They still have so much forward, so much defense talent. Dougie Hamilton will be healthy. They had him for like 16 games this season. So, and I think when looking at the New Jersey Devils, Timo Meier has really found his footing, especially of late. The New Jersey Devils can get even 903 goaltending next season, 905. They're going to be a playoff team. They're going to be north of 100 points. They're probably going to steal my New York Islanders spot for the third Metro. I think they're over 60% likely to make the playoffs. I was high on them coming into this season. Well, not in the regular season, but I didn't make the Stanley Cup final. So obviously, I believe in this core still. I think this year was just very unfortunate, and they're going to have some internal growth as well as better goaltending. They should make the playoffs. The Anaheim Ducks are still 2 to 3 years away, especially after this year. We expected them to maybe take that jump up into like the 70 points. Didn't really happen. They did have horrible injury luck, but I still think they are 2 to 3 years away unless they get very aggressive. But next year, I'm going to have them, probably in like mid 70s. I don't think they're going to make it or even come close. Montreal, same thing. They definitely are trending in the right direction. Next year playoffs, ahead of, as I mentioned before, those 4 Atlantic teams, ahead of a Detroit, ahead of a Buffalo. I don't really see it happening next year. I think the year after, Kent Hughes is going to get very aggressive in free agency, trading for actual high-end roster players. I think they're still 2 years away, not 3 years away, but I think next year is probably not their year quite yet. They're not going to be tanking. Like, they shouldn't be tanking for goddamn James Haggins. But when looking at the Canadians, they're still 2 years away. Ottawa Senators, I'm an idiot for saying this, but yeah, I think maybe next year. They should. Similarly to the Devils, if they can get 905 goaltending, which is easier said than done with how bad Korpisalo has been and considering his contract's not really movable. The Devils can go out and trade for somebody. The Ottawa Senators can get decent goaltending. I do believe in their forward core. I believe in Jake Sanderson as a legit number one, especially next year. What happens with Chychrun, that's very interesting. They're probably going to trade him not for assets, for an actual roster piece. So I don't think the drop-off is going to be crazy when they trade him. But I think the Ottawa Senators are definitely in the maybe category in terms of playoffs next year. Philadelphia Flyers, I'm going to go in no man's land. I know this might be controversial because they are battling for a playoff spot this year, but I think you look at them down the stretch, not that they're more so the team that lost 8 straight games. They're not that bad, but I don't think, especially after not having Carter Hart next year, most likely barring a goddamn miracle, a legal miracle for him, he's not going to be there. And I'm not sure I trust the goalie tandem of Urs and Fedotov. Again, they don't have anybody internally that's going to step up next year. You thought maybe Cutter Gauthier would be that. So I think the Philadelphia Flyers, although they have Mitchkov, although they have a bunch of decent pieces, I think over the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to be a decent 80-ish point team under Torts, a guy that's not a rebuild coach, even though they probably should have been trending more so towards a rebuild and getting some high draft picks. I think they're kind of stuck in no man's land. I'm not going to lie. San Jose Sharks, deep rebuild. You're going to see, I'm obviously not going to do these teams. I'm going to stop after these 4. I just did the NHL 22 logos thing. Yeah, the Carolina Hurricanes are a playoff team. I know. When looking at the San Jose Sharks, yeah, I really like the way that they're going, but they're still 3-4 years away, most likely. Probably 2028 is what you're looking at when you expect it to make the playoffs. They're going to be really bad next year as well. Will Smith's not going to be with the team. If they get Celebrini, maybe that moves up the timeline a bit, but there's only a 25% chance that happens. If they get a Demidov or Peric or Leshinov, one of those guys, they're going to take long to develop. They have a very good future cooking, but they still have a decent way to go in terms of competing at a high level, especially in a pretty loaded Western Conference this year. We saw at the top 8 teams. Minnesota Wild, I'm going to go playoffs likely this year. I think a lot of stuff went wrong with them early in the season. Horrendous goaltending from Gustafsson and Fleury. They're going to bring in a new backup, most likely, for Fleury, get a more legitimate, young, a guy that's in his prime that's not going to worry about him falling off a cliff. And when looking at it, they lost Spurgeon really early on in the season. Next season, I think Brodin, Spurgeon, Faber, very good defense core. The forward core is also going to step up. Another year of Rossi, Boldy, a bunch of other guys that are pretty young, taking an internal step. I would have them in the playoffs over the Nashville Predators this year, although I doubted Nashville coming into this season. I think when looking at it, the Minnesota Wild have, I wouldn't say as high as the New Jersey Devils, but I would put them at around 60% chance to make the playoffs, considering how consistent they were in prior years. I think they're going to return to that. It's not like there's some aging core. Columbus, still 2 to 3 years away. It's Columbus. I feel like they've been 2 to 3 years away since 2020 for the most part. Well, they made the playoffs in 2020. What am I saying? But when looking at them, I think they're going to have to need to get another pie pick this year, next year with Johnny Gaudreau, a bunch of other guys, Boone Jenner. They're still in a weird transitional period with some of those guys. They have solid young pieces, but next year, not making the playoffs. They're not taking some massive jump next year. Washington Capitals, I'm going to go with no man's land. Well, again, any of these teams could contend for the playoffs. I'm just saying these are like youngish teams that are going to be battling for a playoff spot. These teams, I think, are not going to make the playoffs, but are also old. So, like, obviously, these teams are better than these teams. I think that goes without saying. But when looking at the Washington Capitals, they have a much better prospect pool and younger players than like the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think that it's just going to be until Ovechkin gets the goal record, which might be next year for all we know. They're in this kind of no man's land where they're still a competitive team. They want to give the last run to Carlson Ovechkin. Once Ovechkin gets the goals record and maybe they move on from him or he just kind of sits in the back during rebuild, retool, then they'll have more of a direction. But right now, I do think that they are a little bit of a no man's land team. I think my New York Islanders are a no man's land team, even though they're in the playoffs. So like, I'm not judging the Capitals and Penguins. My team's also there. And then lastly, we got the Calgary Flames, and I am going to throw them in deep rebuild. I think it's going to be, they probably have the longest time horizon, longer than the San Jose Sharks right now. It's going to be maybe 4 to 5 years because they're just heading down now in terms of a rebuild. Yes, they have some competitive pieces. They got Kuzmenko, they got Sharon Govich, but I think that they're going to be a bottom 10 team. I don't know if they're ever going to bottom out, considering they are getting a new arena relatively soon. You don't be horrible when that happens, but they're going to be a low-end team for the next couple years. And with all the assets that they got at this year's deadline, then work their way out. They're going to be going through a rebuild. It's not going to be a nuclear rebuild like San Jose or Chicago, but they're going to be going through it. So, this is my tier list. Yeah, I think I have everybody. Yeah, everybody below is a playoff team. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? And I'll be seeing you in the next one.